G'day. I finally bit the bullet and bought myself a new set of screwdrivers for work. I've got a set, they were second hand, they came in a plastic case and they're not in terribly good shape. And so I went and bought a bunch of screwdrivers. Problem is that they came loose. So I have to make up some form of stand or holder or something for them so they don't slap around inside the toolbox. Now I came up with a list of around about 6 ways of doing that, but what I'm going to do, at least for the moment, is make them out of bent wire. So something like that. As you can see, cradle at the front for the shaft, one at the back for the handle, a stop to stop it sliding out that way, and I should be able to make some of these up and put them onto a base, and that'll lock everything into position. I may go to something like a vacuum formed later on, but at the moment don't need to. However, there are some tricks to making these things so they look like they're, shall we say, professionally made, rather than something that's just been sort of whipped up with a pair of pliers in 5 minutes. Pliers do play a part, but there are other things to bear in mind. One of the tools which comes in very handy for doing this sort of work is my mill. And the reason for that is it's big and solid, and I can put this little block in the vise. This particular block here, it's just a piece of steel which was lying around at the time I needed to make this, and I've put two dowel pins in there. They're separated by the width of my wire plus a little bit, 0.3 of a millimetre. The ones down this end are for a different wire size. This is for 1/8 wire. So there's a piece of 1/8 wire. Now, if I want a nice bend out of that, I could just pull that round. But what will happen is if I'm applying a force sort of there, a distance away from those pins, it's going to put a bit of a curve in there as well as the tight radius. So I made up this tool, and basically it's a piece of bar with a slot in it, wide enough to take the wire, and as you notice there's a couple of hooks there. So those hooks go like so, and then when I want to put a bend in, I can do that. It slides off the top, and as you can see there, I've got a bend, it matches the radii of my pins, and doesn't have any of the slight curvatures there, so it's a nice sharp bend. I have done something similar in the past with a piece of tube. That's a bit of tube, I think, with about an 8mm bore. That will certainly do it, but not as nicely. This tube is probably a little bit oversized for this wire, but that's the basis here. So this sort of tooling, very basic, very simple, but gives you much better control over bending your wire. A couple of tools that you may wish to have on hand. First of all, a marker pen of some sort so that you can mark off lengths and positions of bends. Some pliers. A pair of locking pliers is useful for reasons you'll see in a moment. These ones here, these are a Nipex plier, and they're a little bit unusual in that they've got a parallel motion to the jaws. And to change that, you just push the button in and move it further down the rack. So the range is limited, but they're very good for, they're flat-jawed, they're very good for squashing things. You can use them to hold nuts because they're parallel jaws, so that's another good thing. But these I found are very useful for doing this. When starting something like this, one of the things you need to look for is symmetry. As you can see, that shape there is symmetrical. The rest of it is not so. So to me, that's the place to start. The reason being, if you can't get that right, well, you're wasting your time, and it's very difficult working from one end to try and get a symmetrical feature. So you're better off starting there and moving around. Now, to put this bend in and start me on my way, I've made up a little jig here. It's an aluminium plate with two 4mm holes for some 4mm dowels, and in this case, for the screwdriver I'm making the jig for, that's a 7mm hole. Now I'm just using a 7mm drill bit, and this happens to be one that is relatively unscarred on the shank. So that's going to act as a pin for me to bend around. Be very careful with that. I had a taller drill bit in there. I managed to scratch my hand across it the other day, so yeah, just be careful, don't injure yourself. However, what we're going to do, put one pin in there, one drill bit. I've marked my wire where that feature is going to be. If you're of a mathematical mind, you can set up a spreadsheet and do all sorts of wonderful things to work out how long the wire needs to be and where it's going to be and all that sort of stuff. But for me, that's what I did. And then I'm just going to put that there. That mark there should be the center, so I'm going to just use this as a bending tool and just bend that round. So I've got my tool there, and I'm going to bend that round. Now, you can see there on the side that's had the dowel pin, it's a nice smooth bend. Oh, sorry, it goes straight and then a nice smooth bend. On the other side, where I'm just bending this by hand, I've got that radius, but I've also got a bit more of a radius, and that's what we've got to try and eliminate. And that's where these come in very handy, because I can put those on there and squash that if I adjust them correctly. And as you can see, that straightens that out nicely. I still need to get that round. I need to get about 180 degrees on that. So I'm now going to rework that. And what I'll do too is I'll use my locking pliers to actually hold that against the drill bit. The reason being, as you get round further, it tends to ride up a little bit, so you want to keep that in contact with your pin, and so therefore I'll use the locking pliers to do that. Now, to refinish this bend, get it nice and parallel, get it nice and straight, I'm going to get my pliers here and just form that around the drill bit, as you can see. All right. So there I've got a bend around my form, which is roughly 180 degrees. I can now go back to my little jig here, put that there, and then proceed to bend that round so I get this similar shape. These don't have to be quite 180 degrees, but I prefer to bend a little bit over and then bend back rather than not. So there we have the first part. Nearly symmetrical, but I'll be able to bend those out and then do a little bit of rework on that just to get that up to where I want it to be. Done a little bit of work there. Similar to here, I clamped that dowel in there, then squished and manipulated with my pliers. A smooth plier like that is much better than having serrated jaws because it means you don't put marks on your wire. This is actually some stainless steel welding wire, by the way. I wouldn't dream of trying to TIG anything with wire this thick because it would really chill the puddle down for the thin stuff I'm doing. But for bending, it's always nice to have straight wire. If you do have a bit with a curve, a gentle curve from the roll, try and straighten it out by just twisting on the ends. Don't go along and do that because you'll put little waves in it. Anyway, so I've got that bit done. Now I've marked out on my block here, using the centre line of the middle hole, a distance down and some marks on there so that I can put that on there and just check that I've got the right amount of angle coming out, as well as I've got the length. Now there's a mark just there and there's a mark just underneath this wire here, so I think that's pretty much where I want it. That's the width of the handle of the screwdriver. I'm going to put a mark there and a mark there because that's going to be the basis of my next bend. I'm going to do the bends here rather than using my flash jig. One of the reasons for that being that I haven't finished building it yet. I started some time ago and still haven't finished. But the other one is just to show that you don't have to have the flash jigs, provided you can be patient. Now that distance there I've worked out, so I try and keep all the distances of the screwdrivers the same, so that I can come across with a lid and hold them down if I need to. As you can see, that fits quite nicely. When you're putting these marks on, you're aiming for consistency, so I'm going to position that mark just behind the dowel pin there, and then I'm going to bend that 90 degrees, and I might even try and use these to help. Bit too far, but that's all right. Now I made a note where I positioned that, and so for this next bend I need to do the same thing. And you can see here, this bend here was bent around the dowel and using the pliers to hold it there. Straight, bend, straight. This one here, straight, bend, sort of bend, straight. And so I'm going to have to work on that and fix that up. But that's an illustration of you know, how to go from something that looks quite good to something that looks pretty average. Okay, that's fixable. That's not a problem there. But yeah, just it's one of the important things. You know, start with a symmetrical part, and try and keep your bends to bends and your straights to straights, and don't sort of mix the two up like I have here. I've evened that up so that I haven't got one ear higher than the other. It's really important when doing this sort of stuff to make your corrections as you go. Once it's all together at the end there, you'll be able to do a little bit of manipulation, but if you get the bend in the wrong spot, then you know you're basically stuffed. You won't be able to fix that at the end. So what I've done here, I've come along, I've bent this up. I'm now going to do this particular feature here. It's actually on this side, so this is actually a mirror image of this one, but that doesn't matter. So I'm now going to find a former to bend that round. Now I could have something size for size and then I'd have to bend it a bit tighter, or I could have something which is a bit smaller and rely on spring back to take it down back to size. Now I'm going to rely on spring back. I've got to find a former now, but that's my plan of attack for this one. To get this big radii in, I've just clamped a bit of aluminium bar stock in about the right size, or a little bit under the right size, held onto the wire with some vice grips, and then I've just bent that round. Now this is a great illustration of spring back here. There's a gap of probably about 2 millimeters between the wire and the form, even though I've pulled that up tight when I was bending it, and so that'll actually give me about the number I want, which is good. but it just shows that yes, you do have to allow for spring back in some of these situations. This is shaping up quite nicely. The screwdriver sits in there quite well. The radius I've got on the back there seems to be sufficient, and I just need to now bend that down, bring it back up, put that triangular feature in there as a backstop, and then I'm finished. So there's the finished article. I need to trim that back just a smidge. That was meant to be a bit longer, but pure luck put it where it was. You take your luck when you can get it. That one needs to be cut off there, and then I'm going to, as I did with this one, just put a dot of weld there just to hold it together. Once I've got that welded, I can then just sort of make sure everything's square. I might have to do a bit of measuring there and you know, trim and twist and poke and twist, but that's basically it. So yes, bent wire can work quite nicely. Make sure your wire is straight though, and make sure your bends are tight.